Hey everybody, welcome back to the Maple Grove Scripture Reading Podcast. So last time, Elihu was making his opening move. He quoted 4 things Job had put on record. I am pure, I have done no wrong, I am clean and free from sin, and yet God treats me as his enemy. Then came the first challenge. In this, you're not right, for God is greater than any mortal. So he's going to open today with a question that just sets everything up. Why do you complain that God responds to no one's words? And today he's going to answer that in verses 13 through 22. So let me read through that. Why do you complain to him that he responds to no one's words? For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on people as they slumber in their beds, he may speak in their ears and terrify them with warnings, to turn them from wrongdoing and to keep them from pride, to preserve them from the pit, their lives from perishing by the sword. Or someone may be chastened on a bed of pain with constant distress in their bones, so that their body finds food repulsive and their soul loathes the choicest meal. Their flesh wastes away to nothing, and their bones, once hidden, now stick out. They draw near to the pit, and their life to the messengers of death. So Job's complaint, the one woven through the middle chapters of the book, is that God won't answer. He cried out and got nothing. In chapter 19, he said he had no justice. In chapter 23, he said he looked every direction and couldn't find God. In chapter 30, he said he called and God gave no answer. The silence wasn't a passing frustration. It had become the center of his suffering, the wound underneath all the other wounds. Elihu doesn't dispute that Job experienced silence. He disputes what that experience means. For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. That word is the pivot. Not silence, but imperception. The problem isn't that God has stopped communicating. The problem is that God speaks in modes people don't automatically recognize as speech. The silence Job experienced may have been exactly that. Not absence, but speech arriving in a form he didn't know how to read. It's a fundamentally different charge than anything that the 3 friends have made. They argued that God wasn't answering because Job had sinned and needed to confess. That argument required proving Job's guilt, which they never managed. Elihu's argument doesn't require that. He isn't attacking Job's innocence. He's pointing at something Job missed, 2 modes of divine communication that were available to him the whole time, and neither of them looks like what Job was waiting for. The friends' failure is instructive here. Their problem was that they couldn't prove their case, so they kept repeating it louder, hoping volume would do what evidence couldn't. Elihu doesn't need Job to be guilty to make his point. He needs Job to consider that God's voice reaches people in forms they don't expect. And that's a challenge Job simply can't refute by pointing to his innocence. It's a different kind of argument aimed at a different part of the problem. So the first mode is dreams. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on people as they slumber in their beds. Dreams carried real weight in the ancient world, not just culturally. In the biblical narrative, God uses them regularly and deliberately. He spoke to Jacob at Bethel when Jacob was a fugitive sleeping on the ground. He gave Joseph dreams that set the entire Egyptian sequence in motion, then gave Pharaoh a dream Joseph decoded, and the interpretation saved a region from famine. He called Samuel in the night, while the boy was still young and had never heard the voice. He gave Nebuchadnezzar a dream Daniel was summoned to interpret. In each case, the dream isn't incidental, it's the chosen medium. God reached people through it precisely because it worked when other channels didn't. Elihu's observation about why it works is specific. When deep sleep falls on people, the defenses are down. Waking life gives a person room to manage what they're willing to hear. It's possible to talk yourself out of conviction, rationalize away discomfort, keep the volume on uncomfortable truth low enough to ignore. Sleep removes that option. The reasoning mind that builds those defenses isn't running. There's nothing between the person and what God has to say. And so God speaks in their ears and terrifies them with warnings. Now, Elihu doesn't soften this. The word terrify is exactly what it sounds like. These aren't reassuring dreams that send a person off at peace. They're the kind that leave a mark, the kind you wake from at 3 a.m. with something pressing on your chest that you can't quite name, but also can't ignore. The purpose behind the terror is correction, to turn them from wrongdoing and keep them from pride. Notice what Elihu doesn't say here. He doesn't say that the dream is God's punishment. He doesn't say it proves the person is guilty of anything. The dream is corrective, not retributive. God isn't sending it to condemn, he's sending it to redirect. The same God who fashioned the person from clay is using the night to steer them away from a bad ending. Now, pride is the second item on that list, and Elihu names it deliberately. The 3 friends never identified pride as Job's problem. They accused him of specific hidden sins, mistreating the poor, abusing his position. Elihu isn't making those accusations. He's pointing at pride, which works differently. A person can be innocent of every specific charge and still be moving in the direction of pride. Specifically, the kind of pride that believes one's own righteousness creates a legal claim against God. The dream, as Elihu describes it, is aimed at that root before it produces fruit. All of it is to preserve them from the pit, their lives from perishing by the sword. The pit appears here for the first time in this passage, and it will keep coming back in verse 22, in verse 24, verse 28, and again in verse 30. Elihu keeps returning to it because it's the destination that God's intervention is working against. The pit is death, the end of the road. Everything in these verses, dreams and suffering both, is aimed at keeping people from arriving there. The second mode doesn't come in the night, it comes in the body. Or someone may be chastened on a bed of pain with constant distress in their bones, so that their body finds food repulsive, and their soul loathes the choicest meal. Their flesh wastes away to nothing, and their bones, once hidden, now stick out. This is specific and physical in a way that the dream section isn't. The loss of appetite so complete the body rejects even appealing food. The wasting of flesh, the bones pressing through the skin. Anyone who has sat beside someone in that condition or been in it themselves doesn't need the details explained. The description is accurate, and it's not gentle. And it tracks directly to Job. His skin, his bones, his appetite, all of it collapsed in the opening chapters of the book. Elihu is laying out a theological framework for what suffering does, and Job is sitting across from him as the living example. Whether Elihu intends that as an indictment or as an invitation to a different interpretation of what Job has been living through, the text leaves that open. But the connection is there, and Job would feel it. What suffering does in Elihu's framework is the same thing dreams do, just through a different mechanism. Suffering strips away the structures that keep a person insulated from truth. A body in serious pain can't sustain pride. A person watching their own flesh disappear has been brought down to something basic. The pretenses that hold easily in ordinary life become very hard to maintain when the body is failing. And just as the dream comes at night when defenses are down, illness takes away the capacity to self-manage in a different way. You can't argue yourself healthy. You can't perform your way out of it. Verse 22 lands at the same place the dream section landed. They draw near to the pit, and their life to the messengers of death. It's a different road, but the same edge. Both modes, dream and suffering, lead to this edge, not as final punishment. The whole point of what comes next is that the pit isn't the last word. Both channels are aimed at the same place, the edge, where everything else has been stripped away and something new becomes possible. That something new is what the next passage is about, verses 23 through 28, which we'll look at next time. In that passage, a messenger is going to appear at the edge of the pit, and a ransom will be found, and someone who is headed down gets turned around entirely. What Elihu is going to describe next is the most theologically charged passage in all of his speeches. All right, hope you have a great day, and we'll talk again soon. God bless.